On a rainy Friday night, in the heart of a bustling coastal city, paramedics rushed a 25-year-old man into the emergency ward. His screams echoed down the sterile hospital corridors, his voice breaking with agony as doctors and nurses scrambled to understand what they were witnessing. It wasn't a gunshot wound. It wasn't a stabbing. It was something far stranger, something most people only hear about in whisper rumors. The young man's most intimate part of his body was literally rotting away before their eyes. His name was Adrian Cole, just 25, a college dropout with a restless spirit. Friends described him as cocky, thrill-seeking, the type of guy who never turned down a dare and always believed he was invincible. He bounced between jobs, nights filled with bar hopping and wild parties. To Adrian, life was short, and pleasure was meant to be chased, no matter the cost. But on this particular night, his search for excitement would lead him down a path darker than anything he could have imagined. Hours earlier, Adrian had been lying in a hospital bed. He had been inside one of the city's most exclusive lounges, sipping whiskey and scanning the crowd for something or someone that could keep the night interesting. That's when he saw her. Eleanor Graves, 71 years old, elegant, mysterious, out of place among the neon-lit crowd of 20-somethings. She wore a dark emerald dress, her silver hair pinned up with an antique clasp, her movements slow and deliberate, as though time itself bowed around her. The bartenders treated her with quiet respect, sliding her glass of red wine before she even asked. Adrian was intrigued. She wasn't like anyone else in the room. No Instagram filters. No cheap perfume. She radiated something he couldn't quite name, part danger, part allure. And when their eyes met, Eleanor smiled. Not the friendly smile of a grandmother, but the sly, knowing grin of someone who had seen centuries of secrets. Against his friend's laughter and warnings, Adrian walked over. The conversation flowed easier than he expected. She asked about his life, his dreams, his energy. "You're burning so brightly," she told him, her voice low and smooth, like a flame that doesn't realize how quickly it will run out. He laughed it off, but inside he felt a chill. One drink became two. Two became three. Before long, Eleanor invited him back to her home. A sprawling mansion on the edge of town, one that locals whispered about but rarely entered. The kind of house with drawn curtains and iron gates that had more than they revealed. Adrian, buzzed on liquor and adrenaline, agreed without hesitation. To him, it wasn't strange. It was an adventure. As they left the lounge together, the rain picked up, streaking the streets in shimmering reflections of neon and headlights. Adrian pulled his jacket tighter, but Eleanor seemed untouched, gliding through the downpour as if it parted for her. Neighbors later recalled seeing the two of them at the wrought iron gate that night. A boyish man with restless energy, and a woman who looked as though she'd stepped straight out of another century. Adrian had no idea he was walking into the last night of his old life. By morning, everything would change. His laughter, his cocky grin, his reckless confidence, all of it would be replaced with horror. What began as a Chan encounter in a bar was about to spiral into one of the strangest true crime cases the city had ever seen. Because when the sun rose the next day, Adrian Cole's body would betray him in the most grotesque way possible, and investigators would be left with a chilling question. Was this the work of disease or something much darker? The drive to Eleanor's estate took nearly half an hour, winding through rain-soaked streets and into the wealthier, older part of the city. Adrian leaned against the leather seat of her vintage black sedan, the kind of car you'd expect to see in an old Hollywood film, not cruising down a modern freeway. She drove in silence, the wipers cutting across the windshield in rhythmic swipes. Adrian tried to crack a few jokes, but her responses were short, deliberate, and strangely hypnotic. When the gates finally opened, Adrian couldn't believe his eyes. Eleanor's home wasn't just a house. It was a mansion that looked like it belonged to another century. a massive Victorian structure, its windows tall and narrow, ivy curling up the stone facade. Lantern-style lights glowed faintly along the gravel driveway, flickering in the storm like watchful eyes. Inside, the place was even more unsettling. The grand foyer was lined with portraits of grim-faced ancestors, their eyes painted so realistically it felt like they followed Adrian with every step. The air carried a thick scent, not perfume, not dust, but something earthy, herbal, almost medicinal. On a nearby table, Adrian noticed a collection of glass vials filled with strange powders and dried plants. He assumed it was some eccentric hobby, the kind of thing lonely rich people collected. "Do you live here alone?" Adrian asked, half expecting to see a caretaker shuffle out from the shadows. "I haven't lived with anyone in decades," Eleanor replied, her voice calm, almost attached. "But the house remembers." The word sent a shiver up his spine. Still, the lure of the night, the thrill of doing something reckless, kept him from backing out. Eleanor led him into a parlor lit only by firelight and a dozen tall candles. A record player crooned faint jazz from another era. She poured him another glass of wine, darker and heavier than anything he'd ever tasted. As the night deepened, her questions grew stranger. She asked about his blood type, about whether illness ran in his family, about whether he had ever shared himself with someone much older. Adrian laughed nervously, chalking it up to a weird sense of humor. But when Eleanor reached out and traced a finger across his wrist, whispering, "Such strong veins, such vibrant warmth," his laughter died in his throat. Soon, she returned with a small jar of ointment, thick, green, and pungent. Without asking, she dabbed across his chest, his arms, even his thighs. The sensation burned and tingled, like mint mixed with smoke. "It will heighten the connection," she murmured. Adrian, drunk and flushed, didn't protest. The atmosphere turned heavier, almost ritualistic. Eleanor dimmed the lights further, pulling him toward the canopy bed draped in deep red curtains. On the nightstand, Adrian swore he saw a tattered book filled with handwritten notes, diagrams of the human body, and strange symbols he couldn't recognize. He thought about asking, but Eleanor's lips pressed against his before he could speak. What followed was less romance and more ceremony, every movement deliberate, every word whispered in a language he didn't understand. Adrian felt his head spin, his body light and heavy all at once, as though the wine and ointment had clouded his senses. The fire crackled. Shadows danced along the walls. Somewhere in the distance, a grandfather clock struck midnight. For Adrian, it was intoxicating, part fantasy, part nightmare. He told himself he was lucky that this was a story he bragged about for years. A young man in the arms of a mysterious older woman. He thought he was in control, thought he had the upper hand. But as his eyelids grew heavier and the room blurred around him, one final image lodged itself into his mind. Eleanor's face hovering above him, her expression unreadable. Not lust, not affection, something colder, predatory, like a surgeon studying her patient or a predator savoring its prey. By the time Adrian slipped into unconsciousness, the storm outside had quieted. The house, ancient and silent, seemed to breathe with him. He would not wake until morning. And when he did, the nightmare would begin. The first thing Adrian noticed when he woke wasn't the sunlight. It was the smell, a sour metallic stench that clung to his skin, thick enough to make him gag. He blinked, disoriented, staring at the heavy red curtains that blocked out most of the morning light. His head throbbed from too much wine. His mouth was dry, his body sticky with sweat. For a moment, he thought it was just a hangover. But then the pain hit, a deep, searing burn between his legs, like fire spreading under his skin. Adrian groaned and stumbled out of bed, clutching at his groin. His fingers came away damp, and when he looked down, Horror froze him in place. His skin was blistered, mottled with angry purples and blacks. The flesh looked wrong, swollen, raw, as if it had begun to decay overnight. "Eleanor," he called out, his voice cracking with panic. But the bed beside him was empty. The wine glasses were gone. The fire in the hearth was cold ash. It was as though she had vanished from the house entirely. Adrian staggered toward the bathroom, his bare feet sliding across the polished wood floor. The large mirror above the sink reflected a man he didn't recognize. His face pale, lips trembling, eyes wide with fear. He yanked down the waistband of his jeans, desperate to understand what was happening. What he saw nearly made him collapse. The tissue had begun to split, seeping fluid. The skin looked gray, peeling away in spots. The smell was unbearable, sickly sweet, and rotten. He gagged, dropping to his knees, clutching the sink for balance. Adrian's mind raced. Was it an STD? Poison? Some kind of allergic reaction to the strange ointment Eleanor had rubbed onto him? His memory of the night blurred, images overlapping, her whispers, the burning sensation, the way she'd stared at him like she was studying him under a microscope. He stumbled back into the bedroom, searching for his phone, for Eleanor, for anything. But the house was silent. Too silent. The portraits on the wall seemed to stare down at him, their painted eyes full of accusation. He felt like prey that had been left to rot. Finally, he burst out the front door into the rainy morning air, clutching his stomach, screaming for help. His cries echoed down the quiet suburban street. A neighbor watering plants froze. Horrified by the sight of the young man doubled over, his skin ashen, his pants stained with blood. Within minutes, sirens wailed. Paramedics rushed to the scene, lifting Adrian onto a stretcher. One EMT gagged as soon as the smell hit him. "What the hell happened to him?" another whispered. But Adrian was too weak to explain, his words jumbled, his throat dry. All he could manage was a hoarse whisper. "The woman, Eleanor, she did this." At the hospital, chaos erupted. Doctors swarmed around his bed. Nurses pulled on double gloves, masks, and face shields. The infection was spreading at an impossible rate, consuming the tissue faster than anything they had ever seen. "Necrotizing fasciitis," one surgeon muttered, his face grim. "Flesh-eating bacteria. A medical emergency that required immediate surgery. Or the patient would die within hours." But how had it started? In healthy, young men like Adrian. Such infections were almost unheard of without trauma or surgery. The mystery only deepened when tests revealed traces of herbal compounds on his skin. Strange oils and powders that didn't belong in any medical context. By midday, Adrian was sedated and wheeled into the operating room. His screams echoed in the memories of the ER staff who had first treated him. Outside, investigators gathered around his bloody clothes, whispering about the bizarre details he'd managed to share. A young man, seduced by a woman 3 times his age. A night of passion turned into horror. And now, the question no one could answer. What exactly had Eleanor Graves done to him? The operating room lights glared down like unblinking suns as surgeons fought to save Adrian Cole's life. His body lay draped in sterile sheets, but beneath them, the damage was shocking. Entire sections of flesh had turned black overnight, the tissue crumbling at the touch of a scalpel. The infection was moving fast, eating through muscle as though his body had become its banquet. "Scalpel," the lead surgeon barked. "Vitals dropping," a nurse warned. "Clamp that artery, move." It was a race against time. Every second mattered. Necrotizing fasciitis doesn't wait, and once it spreads, there's often no coming back. Doctors cut away dead tissue, working desperately to stop the bacteria from reaching vital organs. The air inside they are filled with a metallic tang of blood and the sickly sweet odor of decay. Hours passed. By the time Adrian was wheeled into recovery, pale and unconscious, The surgeons looked shaken. They had removed more tissue than anyone wanted to admit. He would live for now, but the damage was permanent. One resident whispered, "He'll never be the same." Meanwhile, hospital staff gathered outside, buzzing with questions. Cases of flesh-eating bacteria were rare. For one to appear in a healthy 25-year-old man with no history of surgery, no open wounds, no underlying disease, it didn't add up. Something had triggered it. But what? Detectives arrived later that afternoon. They found Adrian drifting in and out of sedation, his voice hoarse, his body trembling from both infection and anesthesia. Still, he managed to say one name: Eleanor Graves. The detectives exchanged glances. Who was she? Why hadn't she been found at the house? When they visited the mansion, what they discovered unsettled even seasoned investigators. The kitchen was spotless, no trace of breakfast, no sign of a recent meal. But in the parlor, shelves of glass vials lined the walls, some filled with dried herbs, others with murky liquids. Labels were scrawled in old handwriting: mugwort, belladonna, aconite. Poisons and medicinal plants, stored side by side. In the basement, they found something stranger still: a locked cabinet filled with notebooks. Inside were pages written in a mix of English, Latin, and medical shorthand. Some described wartime medical practices. Others looked more like rituals. Drawings of human bodies with arrows pointing to veins and organs. Scribbled phrases like "life force through blood," and "the younger, the stronger." Neighbors gave chilling testimony. They described Eleanor as reclusive, rarely seen in daylight, but often hosting visitors. Young men, usually alone, who never seemed to stay long. One neighbor swore he'd seen ambulances outside the mansion years ago, but no reports had ever surfaced. Another admitted he once heard screams in the night, but convinced himself it was just a nightmare. Back at the hospital, Adrian's condition fluctuated. He survived surgery, but fevers racked his body. For drips pumped antibiotics into his veins. Machines beeped steadily at his bedside. His friends came, shaken by the sight of the once cocky, invincible Adrian now reduced to a frail, trembling figure. He kept saying it wasn't normal. One friend later told reporters that she did something to him, that it wasn't just bacteria. He said it felt like she stole something from him. Forensic specialists ran tests on the strange ointment traces found on Adrian's skin. Results revealed a cocktail of rare herbs, some used in traditional medicine, but others known for toxic effects. But there was something else, a bacteria culture unlike anything they'd seen, suggesting it could have been deliberately introduced. This raised new, terrifying questions. Was Eleanor Graves experimenting? Was she testing some hybrid of old medicine and modern pathogens? Or was it something darker, ritualistic, symbolic, meant to feed a belief she carried for decades? The press caught wind of the story. Headlines screamed, "Cougar or killer? 71-year-old heiress linked to flesh-eating horror. Mystery mansion. Young man claims he was cursed after night with elderly woman." By the end of the week, Adrian was stable enough to speak to investigators more clearly. He described the night in detail. The ointment, the whispers, the burning sensation, the way Eleanor stared at him with cold fascination. Detective Harris, who led the case, put it bluntly: either she poisoned him or he's the unluckiest man alive. But there was one problem. Eleanor was gone. No sign of her car, no credit card transactions, no neighbors spotting her since that night. She had vanished as if she'd never existed. For Adrian, recovery was slow and brutal. He was alive, but the infection had left scars that could never be undone. He couldn't escape the nightmare, not in his body, not in his mind. And for detectives, the question only deepened. Had they uncovered a medical crime or stumbled onto something far more sinister? Detectives didn't sleep much in the days after Adrian's hospitalization. The case felt different, heavier, like it didn't fit into the usual boxes of crime or accident. They had a victim, a name, and a trail that led straight into shadows. And all of it circled back to one person, Eleanor Graves. Her mansion became ground zero for the investigation. Crime scene techs combed through the high ceiling rooms, photographing every detail. The deeper they dug, the stranger became. In the attic beneath dust and moth-eaten drapes, they found trunks of medical supplies stamped with dates from the 1940s and 50s, antiseptics, gauze, surgical tools. Some still sharp, others rusted with time. They learned Eleanor had once been a nurse, serving in military hospitals during overseas conflicts. Records showed she had been stationed in remote villages where outbreaks of rare diseases were common. She wasn't just a wealthy widow. She was someone who had lived through blood, infection, and desperation. In her bedroom dresser, detectives discovered vials of dried herbs and sealed jars of ointments. Labels were faded, but chemical analysis later identified belladonna, aconite, and other plants associated with both ancient remedies and deadly poisons. Each container had handwritten notes in Eleanor's looping script, mixing precise dosages with cryptic phrases like strengthen the marrow and bind the flesh to spirit. Neighbors began to open up once word spread. Some remembered Eleanor's late husband, a physician who died decades ago. They whispered that his death was sudden, unexplained. Just a heart attack, they were told, but no autopsy had ever been released. Others admitted they'd seen strange visitors over the years. Always men, always younger, leaving at odd hours. She collected them, one neighbor muttered, refusing to meet the camera's eye. And then they were gone. Detectives traced missing persons reports. A handful of men in their 20s had disappeared in the last 15 years within a 50-mile radius. No evidence tied Eleanor directly, but the pattern was chilling. All single, all healthy, all last seen at bars or clubs. When investigators cracked the locked cabin in the basement, the story shifted from bizarre to downright disturbing. Inside were journals dating back nearly half-century. The early entries read like medical logs, field notes about treating soldiers, instructions for sterilizing wounds. But as the years passed, the language darkened. She began writing about energy, vitality, the exchange between youth and age. One entry, dated 1974, read, I watched him fade while I remained. His breath grew thin, his body hollowed. I took what he no longer could carry. My skin tightened. My blood warmed. The method works. The detectives froze. Who was she talking about? Her husband? A patient? A lover? In later notebooks, sketches filled the margins. Human figures with arrows pointing toward the groin, the chest, the spine. Words scrawled alongside them. Source of virility, gate of life force. It was unclear whether Eleanor believed in science, mysticism, or some grotesque blend of both. The press seized on every revelation. Tabloids splashed lurid headlines across front pages. Widow or witch? Inside the mansion of Eleanor Graves. Black widow of the suburbs. Did she feed on youth? Talk shows debated whether she was a manipulative predator or a delusional old woman clinging to outdated remedies. Online forums buzzed with theories, from secret Nazi experiments to vampirism to curses older than Christianity. But for detectives, the question was simpler. Was Eleanor Graves a criminal who deliberately infected Adrian Cole, or was she just a woman with dangerous obsessions whose eccentric habits had accidentally caused his suffering? Adrian, still recovering in the hospital, clung to one memory. The way Eleanor looked at him as he drifted into sleep, not with lust, not with love, but with calculation. She used me, he told investigators, like I was nothing but a battery. Then came the most unsettling discovery of all. Hidden in a false wall in the basement, detectives uncovered photographs. Dozens of them. Men of varying ages, 20s, 30s, some smiling, some caught mid-conversation, as though the pictures had been taken without their knowledge. None of them were recent, and none of them, when cross-referenced, were ever seen again. It painted a chilling picture. Whether by disease, manipulation, or something no medical textbook could explain, Eleanor Graves seemed to have left a trail of broken lives in her wake. But where was she now? Every lead came up cold. No credit card activity. No phone signal. It was as if she had walked out of her mansion and melted into thin air. The public wanted answers. The police wanted justice. And Adrian wanted revenge. And then, just as the case threatened to stall, a tip came in. A sighting of an older woman matching Eleanor's description at a rundown motel 200 miles away. The hunt for Eleanor Graves was about to begin. The tip came in on a Tuesday morning. A motel clerk 200 miles north of the city called police after recognizing Eleanor's face on the evening news. She'd checked in under the name Margaret Hale, paying cash, refusing housekeeping. The clerk said she carried only a leather satchel and moved with a strange calm, like someone who didn't care the world was looking for her. Detectives wasted no time. By nightfall, unmarked vehicles surrounded the roadside inn. Officers crept down the narrow hallway, weapons drawn, as rain hammered the parking lot outside. Every step was silent but charged, like the whole building was holding its breath. Room 14. The door was locked. Eleanor Graves. Open up. Police. No answer. A single knock echoed down the hallway. Then silence. Finally, with a sharp crack, the door splintered under a battering ram. The room was dim, lit only by the flicker of a single lamp. Eleanor sat calmly on the bed, her satchel at her feet. She wasn't startled, didn't run, didn't plead. Instead, she looked up at the officers with that same sly, knowing smile Adrian remembered from a bar. "You came sooner than I expected," she said softly. The satchel contained what everyone feared: jars of ointments, bundles of dried herbs, a journal with more cryptic entries. But tucked inside was something worse: photographs of Adrian, not just from the night they met, but older, candid shots, as though she had been watching him long before. "She's been hunting him," Detective Harris muttered. Eleanor was taken into custody, but even in handcuffs, she radiated unnerving composure. On the ride back, she leaned toward one officer and whispered, "He gave me what I needed. The youth in his veins bought me time. You can't take that from me." The officer recoiled, shaken, swearing her eyes seemed brighter, sharper than when they'd seen her picture just days ago. While Eleanor was processed at the precinct, the media frenzy exploded. Reporters camped outside the station, shouting questions. Cable news hosts debated whether she was a deranged criminal, a pseudoscientist, or something far darker. Social media lit up with hashtags. Hashtag rotting curse. Hashtag Black Widow Eleanor. Hashtag vampire of the suburbs. Adrian, still recovering in the hospital, watched the coverage with trembling hands. Seeing her face on television, calm and defiant, sent chills down his spine. "She's not human," he told his nurse. "She looks at you like you're already dead." But investigators faced a difficult challenge. The evidence was strange, circumstantial. Herbs, journals, photos, disturbing, yes, but not conclusive. Without a smoking gun, the case risked unraveling. Doctors couldn't prove Eleanor had deliberately infected Adrian. They could only confirm the rare bacteria that nearly destroyed him. And then came Eleanor's interrogation. Detective Harris sat across from her, recorder running. "Did you poison Adrian Cole? Did you apply those substances to his body, knowing what they would do?" Eleanor's eyes never wavered. "Poison? No. I gave him a gift. He came to me, burning with youth, wasting it on drink and arrogance. I showed him what it means to be alive, to be remembered. His body couldn't bear the weight. That is not my fault. Then what did you put on him? Harris pressed. A salve, she replied. A recipe older than you could imagine. It has kept me strong when others withered. And yes, it comes at a cost. But nothing is free, detective, not even time. Her words left the room cold. Despite the theatrics, prosecutors knew they had enough to move forward. Adrian's testimony, the bizarre ointments, the journals, the photographs, together they painted a damning picture. Eleanor was formally charged with aggravated assault with a biological agent. Still, Eleanor never once looked afraid. As deputies led her to a holding cell, she paused to face the cameras. Rain streaked down the courthouse steps, her silver hair plastered against her cheeks. She smiled, lips curling with eerie satisfaction. 25 years of life, she murmured, her voice barely audible, but caught on every microphone. That's what he gave me, and I'll spend them well. The footage went viral within hours. Some viewers dismissed her as insane. Others swore she was telling the truth. The narrative split the public. Was Eleanor a manipulative predator who poisoned young men, or was she proof of something supernatural walking in plain sight? For Adrian, the nightmare wasn't over. Even with Eleanor in custody, he couldn't shake the feeling that Pardon was gone forever, stolen in that house on the hill. And for detectives, one haunting thought lingered. If Eleanor really believed she had taken years of Adrian's life, what if she wasn't lying? The trial of Eleanor Graves began 6 months after her arrest, and by then, the story had already reached near mythical status. Every news outlet in America won a seat inside the courthouse. TrueCrime podcast dissected every rumor. Cable hosts speculated on her motives, and outside the courthouse, protesters clashed, some demanding justice for Adrian, others holding signs that read, "She's not a witch, she's a victim of science." Courtroom security was tight. Metal detectors buzzed as reporters, spectators, and family members packed the gallery. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of anticipation. Adrian Cole, now 26, walked in slowly, a cane supporting his weakened frame. His face looked older, worn by trauma, his confidence replaced by visible scars, both physical and emotional. Cameras snapped relentlessly as he took a seat near the prosecution table. When Eleanor was escorted in, the room fell silent. At 72, she moved with unnerving grace, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her expression calm, almost regal. Dressed in a simple navy suit, she didn't look like a monster or a frail old woman. She looked like someone who belonged in control, and that unsettled everyone. Opening arguments set the tone. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Carlin Gwynn, stood tall before the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a case of bad luck or random illness. This is a case of premeditated harm. Eleanor Graves used her knowledge of herbs, toxins, and pathogens to deliberately infect a young man, nearly costing him his life. She has a history of targeting vulnerable men. And today, you will see evidence that proves her obsession with stealing youth and vitality is not folklore, it's criminal." When it was the defense's turn, Eleanor's attorney, Samuel Breyer, shook his head and paced slowly. "This case is built on fear and superstition. My client is a 72-year-old widow who dabbles in traditional remedies, nothing more. Adrian Cole was a willing participant in their encounter. What happened afterward, tragic as it is, was a medical accident, a bacterial infection that could have come from any number of sources. The state wants you to believe in witches and curses because it makes for good television. But in this courtroom, the law demands facts." The jury leaned forward. The battle lines were drawn. Over the next weeks, the trial unfolded like a twisted drama. Forensic experts testified about the rare bacteria found on Adrian's body and the unusual ointment traced back to Eleanor's satchel. Microbiologists debated whether the bacteria could have been cultivated intentionally. Some said yes, it was possible, even likely. Others argued it was nothing more than chance. Then came the journals. Prosecutors entered them into evidence, reading aloud the passages about youthful energy and the marrow of the young. The jury squirmed in their seats as photographs of missing men were projected on the screen. Families of the disappeared filled the courtroom with tears and anger, though the defense objected repeatedly, claiming it was irrelevant and prejudicial. The most powerful moment came when Adrian himself took the stand. His voice shook as he recounted that night. The wine, the ointment, the whispers. "I thought it was just a hookup, maybe even a weird story I'd laugh about later," he told the jury. "But she looked at me like I wasn't even human, like I was a resource. And then I woke up in hell." His words silenced the room, even drawing tears from a few jurors. The defense tried to shake him. "Mr. Cole, isn't it true you were intoxicated that night? That your memory could be unreliable?" "Yes, I was drunk," Adrian admitted. "But you don't forget pain like that. You don't forget the smell of your body rotting while she disappears without a trace." When it was Eleanor's turn to testify, the atmosphere thickened. She chose to take the stand, something most defendants avoid. Her voice was calm, almost hypnotic. "I never harmed Adrian. I cared for him. I gave him something most people never understand, the chance to be remembered, to be part of something bigger than himself. His suffering was not my doing. It was fate." Her attorney nodded approvingly, but the jury shifted uncomfortably. Closing arguments tore the courtroom in two. ADA Nguyen's words rang like a hammer. "This is not folklore. This is not superstition. This is assault with biological weapons. This is obsession turned into violence. If we do not hold her accountable, how many more will she take?" Defense attorney Breyer countered. "You are being asked to convict a woman based on fear, not proof. Fear of age, fear of difference, fear of the unknown. That is not justice." When the jury finally left to deliberate, the world held its breath. News anchors outside speculated live, crowds chanted, and Adrian sat with his head bowed, whispering, "Please, let them believe me." After 2 days, the verdict was read. The jury foreman stood. "On the charge of aggravated assault with a biological agent, we find the defendant guilty." Gasps filled the room. Eleanor did not flinch. She only turned her head slowly toward Adrian, her eyes glinting with something between defiance and satisfaction. The judge sentenced her to 20 years in prison. Reporters erupted outside with breaking news banners, calling it the trial that blurred the line between science and superstition. But for Adrian, the victory felt hollow. He had survived, yes, but at a terrible cost. And as Eleanor was led away, she whispered one last sentence that haunted him for years. "I'll still have more time than you." The courthouse emptied slowly that evening, but the echoes of the verdict lingered far longer. Outside, television crews lit up the night sky with floodlights. Reporters shouted into cameras, and social media exploded with reactions. Some celebrated the conviction as a victory for science, proof that Eleanor Graves had been nothing more than a dangerous predator hiding behind superstition. Others insisted the jury had condemned a woman for being eccentric, painting her as a witch in the 21st century. For Adrian Cole, the verdict was a bitter mix of relief and despair. He had fought to be believed, fought to survive, and at last, the world recognized what had happened to him. But survival had a price. The surgeries had left scars so deep they were impossible to hide. He walked with a limp, relied on medication to manage the pain, and knew the infection had taken away more than flesh. It had taken away the life he thought he would have. The easy confidence, the reckless joy of youth, gone forever. In the months following the trial, Adrian tried to rebuild. He gave interviews on morning shows, telling his story not as a tale of horror, but as a warning. Don't ignore red flags, he told viewers. Don't think you're invincible. One night can change your life forever. He partnered with advocacy groups raising awareness about rare infections and predatory relationships. To many, he became a symbol of survival, but behind the camera lights, he struggled with nightmares. He woke sweating, hearing Eleanor's whisper, "I'll still have more time than you." Meanwhile, Eleanor herself seemed untouched by prison life. Inmates reported she kept to herself, rarely speaking, always calm. Guards noted her unusual discipline. Never sick, never frail, even as years passed. Rumors spread that she was offering remedies to younger prisoners, trading advice for favors. One guard swore she looked younger each time he saw her, though such claims were dismissed as paranoia. 5 years into her sentence, Eleanor collapsed in her cell. For a moment, it seemed her story was over, but in the infirmary, she opened her eyes, smiled, and whispered to the nurse, "Not yet." She lived another 3 years before dying quietly in her sleep. Her journals confiscated and locked away in evidence storage. Even in death, whispers persisted. Some claimed her skin seemed unnaturally smooth, her body oddly preserved. The case became a fixture of true crime documentaries, with titles like The Black Widow of the Suburbs and Science or Sorcery, The Eleanor Graves Mystery. Scholars debated whether she had stumbled upon some crude form of biological weapon, or whether her life was simply a tragic collision of delusion and disease. Paranormal enthusiasts, meanwhile, swore she had tapped into something darker, a ritual that science couldn't explain. For Adrian, no explanation could erase the scars. He lived quietly, away from the spotlight, working as a speaker for trauma survivors. Those who met him describe a man who carried his pain with quiet strength, though his eyes betrayed the weight of memories he could never escape. Years later, at a college lecture, a student asked him the question that always lingered. "Do you believe she really stole your youth?" Adrian paused, his hand tightening on the cane. He thought about the burning ointment, the smell of rot, the look in Eleanor's eyes that night. Finally, he answered, "I don't know if she stole it, but I know I'll never get it back." The room went silent. The story of Eleanor Graves leaves us with more questions than answers. Was she simply a manipulative predator who weaponized bacteria and superstition to destroy lives? Or was she something far more terrifying, a reminder that some secrets of age, disease, and desire remain beyond our understanding? One thing is certain. Adrian Cole's life was forever changed by a single night. And as the world debates a line between science and sorcery, his story stands as a chilling reminder of how fragile youth and trust can truly be.